What up, Marsh Pod? It's a somber one. We were holding out hope to record this one as close to our drop time as possible to get as much of the news in as we could. And quite literally, right before we hit record, the old 1-1 Klay Thompson is headed to Dallas on a 3-year, $50 million deal. There's been no prep for this portion of the pod. Prepped for some other parts. We didn't prep for this one. Man, it stinks. Klay was my favorite player growing up, watching this Warriors team. Growing up feels weird because he's like four years older than me, so that's awkward. But anyway, he was awesome. And it's very interesting to see how his personality has changed over these last couple of years. Because early on in his career, he was always a competitor, obviously, but he was always the low maintenance. You know, Bob Myers would talk about how there's no maintenance with Klay Thompson. He just always shows up, and it's difficult to watch this now and see all of the other factors that have influenced, obviously, his decision to leave. 3 for $50. That's just $2 million in 1 year more than what the Warriors supposedly offered him last season, which was a 2-year, $48 million extension. I do not know, nor have I looked at the cap sheet for the Mavericks to see if they have enough. 3 for $50. I don't even know what that evens out to. Probably 15. That's $18 million a year ish. So that's more than the mid-level exception. I don't know if they have that. So I don't know if this is a sign and trade or not. But it's tough. It's going to be tough to see him. I think this was simply something that he needed to do, though. The Warriors very clearly are trying to reset, and that's one of the things that I do want to get into. But the Warriors are trying to reset this roster. They're trying to financially get themselves in a situation. I said it on the Marsh Mobile that the second apron is so restrictive, and there's a lot of things I'm not familiar with on it that are still going to kind of come to fruition. But the fact that you can't aggregate money. So you have to, if you've got a $20 million guy, you can't acquire two $10 million guys. If you have any type of trade, you can't send out a $20 million guy and get back a 22. In previous CBA, you could get 125%. So you had from 20 million, 125% or 75%. That was the range of which you could take salary back in. That's not the case. We actually have seen that get pretty large. The deal that sent Denny Avdia to Portland, that was, I think there was a $7 million difference between the two contracts. That would not have been a deal possible under the old CBA that brought Malcolm Brogdon to Washington. So there's a lot of restrictions, and clearly the Warriors wanted to get under this, but I think as it relates to Klay specifically, I think that there was just frustration. You saw Draymond Green get an extension. You saw Jordan Poole get an extension. You saw Andrew Wiggins get a 4-year extension, and you're sitting there saying, man, I've been in here for 14 years. I've won 4 championships, Game 6 Klay, and they didn't give it to him. And I kind of think that was fair. The Warriors gave him a max extension right after he tore his Achilles, or tore his ACL, and then he goes a year later and tears his Achilles. He didn't play for 931 days, and he was getting paid max money during that period of time. And so to me, that's always been the fascinating piece of this, is that 2 years doesn't seem to be discussed a lot. That the Warriors paid him max money to literally not play basketball for 2 years, and now at the tail end of his career, he's saying, pay up, I want more. I don't think that's all of it, though. I also think that there was some frustrations with him going to the bench, and that is not easy to do, especially when you're a franchise cornerstone. Kobe never went to the bench, and it's well documented that Klay Thompson, his favorite player, was Kobe Bryant. I am not comparing the two, but that's the type of mentality that these types of people have at the high level, as they should. But I think that was very challenging for him, because you look around and Steph has been awesome, and he's not going to the bench anytime soon. Draymond Green, for all of his divisiveness, is still a very, very impactful basketball player. He's not going to the bench anytime soon. Klay Thompson is a three-point shooter, and he's a goodish defender against bigger, slower wings. He defended guys like Kawhi Leonard pretty well. He held his own, but still wasn't as good as, obviously, LeBron James. If he's a 3, he's a 4. He's not a 2. And that, I think, has just been a challenge to adapt to for a team that really needed him to, and they didn't. And I think that's what really drove this frustration. Again, this is somebody just watching. Man, I don't know the familiarities of inside that organization, but just from the outside looking in, that's what this feels like. It's a sad day, but I think in 5, 10, 15 years, there's going to be a reflection probably that we're going to hear about publicly about how he wished he finished his career in Golden State and that his ego got in the way. We've seen so many stars come back now after the fact and say things like that, right? Talk about how they handled things poorly, how they wish they did things differently. I mean, heck, we're seeing Kyrie Irving make those types of reflections 4 years later, 3 years later. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some reflection in the long run. I don't know the details of this. I wonder if maybe 4 years from now he retires with the Warriors on like a 1-year deal, makes his money and says, holy cow, I want to come back and finish this thing off the way I should have. But it's a sad day. And it's been a build-up for a sad day. The only positive I can take from this is that he's not going to the Lakers. Good. Thank God, man. I mean, look, I'm not a huge Mavs fan, but better than the Lakers. All right, did pretty much two of the pieces that I want to talk about. Second apron, we kind of talked about already. Paul George, that was the other one. Philadelphia looks good on paper, said that on SimWorld today. But this was the only move that they had. I think it's a weird one from Paul George's perspective. But again, I think this falls back on some of that ego, that, as not in a bad way, ego, confidence, and desires. These guys have a small window to make their type of money. And so for Paul George, he says, look, I want 4 years. I'd be very curious to know what a 3-year extension from the Clippers would have been. He turned down, his player option was 48, so I'm not sure what the year one money is for the 76ers. I would imagine it's probably similar to that. I just haven't looked at what the breakdown is. But that's a big move for them. It moves them towards the top of an Eastern Conference that's pretty weak. And I think Paul George, he's kind of been a casualty of Kawhi Leonard and living in that orbit. He played 73 games last season. I think that was the number, but it was the most he'd played in 5 years. I think that some of the reason and the injury concerns that we have around Paul George has been because he's played for an organization that said we are going to load manage the living hell out of our stars. I don't know that was necessarily something that in any other organization he's sitting as much as he did, because he was really efficient, obviously, in Indiana, and he hasn't had, outside of obviously his catastrophic leg injury, he hasn't had a major injury, right? It's not like Kawhi Leonard, who's had the quad whatever he had, the torn ACL and everything else that's circulated around Kawhi Leonard. Paul George hasn't really had like this. He had the shoulder labrum that affected him. I think that was in two playoffs ago, 2 or 3 playoffs ago. But that's kind of been it. So yeah, he hasn't played a ton of games. I kind of wonder if that's just from the fact that he played for a team that's like, we're going to see how far we can push load management. So I like that from that standpoint, but this was a move that the Sixers had to make. They had to make it because there was nobody else available. They weren't going to keep the cap space, considering Tyrese Maxey, who signed a huge deal, was going to be getting something, and that was going to evaporate. You had the benefit of some big money moving off their books, but you also have to show Joel Embiid, who's now 30, with a very, very long injury history. You kind of have to show him that we're going for it, because what you don't want, everybody's going to start looking. If they didn't get Paul George, every single rumor is going to be about Joel Embiid asking out, and we've seen that with Giannis in Milwaukee. They sort of quelled those rumors when they traded for Damian Lillard. They sort of quelled it when they traded for Drew Holiday, but they've persisted. When you don't win, they persist, and I think they just needed to do that to kind of eviscerate it. The funny part of it is that Paul George literally went on his podcast and said James Harden was telling him all this stuff about the 76ers. Maybe he liked what he heard. Last piece. This came out, very interesting timing. The Boston Celtics ownership group is preparing to sell the team. Adrian Wojnarowski mentioned that. Talk about, this came, like I got the alert, 20 minutes after Derek White was announced. He had a 4-year, $125 million deal coming his way. This ownership group literally said, we're going to get our ring. We're going to give everybody the money, and then we're going to get the hell out of Dodge and not be left with the bill, because this team is well into the luxury tax, into the second apron. It's a very restrictive, as we've talked about, second apron. You've got 4 guys that have $100 million deals. Jason Tatum's going to sign a much bigger deal here in the not-too-distant future. But Tatum, Brown, Derek White, and Drew Holiday, huge money on their bills coming up. Kristaps Porzingis has another year left. This team is going to be deep into the second luxury tax, or past the second apron. That means they're either going to have to, 1, deal with the repercussions of it, which are pretty large, or 2, they're going to be paying up and trying to get rid of some of these guys. I don't think they're going to do the latter. I think they're just going to say, we're trying to win as many championships. But this ownership group now says, we don't want to be the ones to pay for it. Somebody else can. I just find that comically hilarious. If we want to get super conspiratorial, big word of the day, LeBron James might sign a 1-year deal with a player option on year 2, which means we could be entering, this was talked about on ESPN, we could be entering the last year of LeBron James on under contract. Obviously, his retirement sooner than it is later. If he gets to play with Bronny James, and then he gets out of the league and becomes an owner of the Boston Celtics, I mean, you want to talk about building a legacy. That's a big one to build. Win a championship with the Lakers. You've got a custom-built, ready-to-win more team in the Celtics. The timing isn't uninteresting. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not. But the timing isn't uninteresting to make it be. All right, that's it. We rambled a little bit on Klay Thompson. That was more therapeutic than it was anything. We're back on SimWorld today, tomorrow. We're back on here on Monday. Thanks for tuning in.